Welcome back to the Israel Illuminated channel. Today we're looking at one of the most important biblical truths of Yeshua and Hanukkah. This study will examine the history, prophecy, and the end-time patterns of the festival of Hanukkah. Let's begin. Hanukkah is often viewed simply as a Jewish cultural festival, commemorating the rededication of the Jewish temple after its desecration under the Seleucid ruler Antiochus Epiphanes. Yet when we look more deeply into both scripture and history, we discover that Hanukkah is much more than a historical footnote. It stands as a prophetic pattern, a preview or rehearsal of events that Yeshua himself warned would recur at the end of the age. Far from being marginal to the biblical story, Hanukkah forms a bridge between the Hebrew scriptures, the Gospels, and the apocalyptic visions of Daniel and the book of Revelation. Next, we will analyze Hanukkah in the Ministry of Yeshua. What many do not realize is that Hanukkah is found in the Gospels. Though it does not appear in the Torah because the events occurred after the close of the Hebrew Scriptures, it appears clearly in the New Testament. The Gospel of John records one of the most striking links between Yeshua and Hanukkah. John 10:22-24 tells us that Yeshua was physically present in Jerusalem for the Feast of Dedication, otherwise called Hanukkah, walking in Solomon's colonnade in the temple complex. It was winter, the season when the Jewish people remembered the Maccabean revolt, the suffering under Antiochus, and the miraculous restoration of the temple altar. It is no coincidence that the conversation that took place during this festival centered on Yeshua's identity as Messiah. The people surrounded him, demanding that he declare himself plainly. Their question echoed the longing of a nation bruised by past oppression and searching for deliverance. Hanukkah, therefore, is not merely historical context. It becomes the prophetic backdrop for Yeshua's later warnings in Matthew chapter 24. The same themes that shaped the Maccabean period, betrayal, desecration, persecution, false peace, flight, and endurance, reappear in Yeshua's discourse about the end times. Yeshua draws directly from Daniel's prophecies mentioned in Matthew 24:15, prophecies that found an earlier fulfillment during the Hanukkah era, yet point ultimately to a future and greater fulfillment. Hanukkah's origins lie in one of the darkest episodes in Jewish history. Daniel's visions of a little horn, a king of fierce countenance who would destroy many by peace, found a historical manifestation in Antiochus Epiphanes, according to Daniel 8:25. Interesting also how 1 Thessalonians 5:3 declares, "When they shall say peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them, as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape," paralleling the same theme before his second coming. Antiochus was a man who rose suddenly to power, proclaiming himself God manifest, and stamping his coins with the title Theos Epiphanes. Known mockingly as Epimanes, the madman, he became infamous for his atrocities against the Jewish people. Both the book of Daniel and 1 Maccabees describe Antiochus's actions with haunting detail. He slaughtered tens of thousands of Jews in Jerusalem, sold many into slavery, defiled the holy place, removed the sacred vessels of the temple, and erected an image of Jupiter upon the altar. He banned circumcision, forced the eating of unclean foods, burned copies of the Torah, and sentenced to death anyone who kept the commandments. His decrees were designed not merely to assimilate the Jews, but to annihilate their identity. The Maccabean narrative also tells us that many Jews betrayed the covenant, allying themselves with Gentile customs, building a Greek gymnasium, disguising their circumcisions, and embracing idolatry. Yet, amid widespread compromise and apostasy, a faithful remnant emerged, those who knew their God, who resisted even at the cost of their lives. Mattathias and his sons, a righteous family of Jewish Hasmoneans, ignited a revolt motivated not by political ambition, but by zeal for the covenant. Next, we will analyze how the Israelis fled to the mountains and how it's a recurring theme. One of the most striking parallels between Hanukkah and Yeshua's end-time warnings is the imagery of believers fleeing to the mountains. The Maccabean account describes how Mattathias and his followers refused to submit to Antiochus's decrees and escaped into the Judean hills, leaving behind everything they owned. In 1 Maccabees chapter 2, verses 27 through 28, it reads, "Then Mattathias went through the town, shouting at the top of his voice, 'Let everyone who has any zeal for the law and takes his stand on the covenant come out and follow me.' Then he fled with his sons into the mountains, leaving all their possessions behind in the town." Yeshua, in Matthew chapter 24, uses similar language when describing the coming tribulation. "Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains." He warns that this future flight will be so severe that his followers must pray it does not occur in winter or on the Sabbath, precisely the conditions associated with the historical events of Hanukkah and during the winter. The horrors described by Yeshua, betrayal, hatred, lawlessness, persecution, and the rise of a deceptive ruler or antichrist, mirror the atmosphere of Antiochus's reign. Matthew 24, 9-12 speaks of believers being delivered to death, betrayed by one another, and hated by all nations. This is not coincidental. Hanukkah becomes a prophetic shadow of the end. Next, we will examine the abomination of desolation, past and future. Central to both Hanukkah and end-time prophecy is the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel. Historically, Antiochus's desecration of the temple, setting up a pagan idol, halting the daily sacrifice, and forcing unclean offerings, fulfilled Daniel 11:31. Jewish historian Josephus corroborates this event, noting that the daily offering ceased for 3 years and 6 months, aligning with Daniel 7:25 and Revelation 13:5 regarding the oppression of the believers for a time, times, and half a time. Yet Yeshua, speaking long after the Maccabean deliverance, warned that another abomination of desolation would arise in the future. Antiochus was a foreshadow, a pattern, but not the final fulfillment. As Hanukkah looks back to a real historical rescue, it also looks forward to a coming crisis that will once again test the faithfulness of God's people. Next, we will unpack the restoration, purification, rededication, and the light of Hanukkah. The Maccabean victory led to the purification of the temple. On the 25th of Kislev, exactly 3 years after its defilement, the altar was rebuilt, the sanctuary purified, and worship restored. For 8 days the people celebrated with joy, giving thanks to God for delivering them from oppression. Judas Maccabeus decreed that this celebration be observed annually, a festival of dedication and victory over darkness. Josephus, writing generations later, calls this feast lights, because deliverance came like a sudden illumination after a season of deep darkness. The spiritual message of Hanukkah, light overcoming oppression, resonates not only with Jewish history but with the messianic mission itself. Yeshua, standing in the temple during Hanukkah, declared himself the Good Shepherd, the one whose sheep recognize his voice even in times of deception and persecution. Next, we must study the prophecy, politics, and modern parallels of Hanukkah and why it's so important to acknowledge and celebrate it. The themes of Hanukkah to modern geopolitical realities, particularly the pressures placed upon Israel by international powers, seem to repeat itself. The demands for territorial withdrawal, the contest over Jerusalem, and the tension surrounding borders and sovereignty echo the ancient struggle over the land and temple. Just as the Jews of the Maccabean era faced pressure to abandon their covenant identity for the sake of political peace, so modern Israel faces relentless pressure under the banner of international diplomacy. Scripture warns repeatedly that a false peace will precede great destruction. Antiochus subdued nations by peace, and Daniel 8:25 says he would destroy many through policies of diplomacy and flattery. The prophetic pattern suggests that history may once again move in this direction before the final redemption. In our conclusion, we will examine Hanukkah as a prophetic lens. Today, the world once again trembles on the edge of global conflict. The Middle East is a powder keg. Nations gather, tensions escalate, the headlines echo the words of the prophets. Judaism calls this period the birth pains of Messiah, and the contractions appear to be increasing. Hanukkah reminds believers that the days ahead may demand courage, sacrifice, and unwavering loyalty to God's truth. It calls us to be alert, to strengthen our faith, and to remain steadfast as we await the Messiah's return. Hanukkah is not merely an ancient commemoration of Jewish resistance. It is a prophetic pattern, a lens through which Scripture invites us to understand the dynamics of spiritual warfare, persecution, compromise, and faithful endurance. For followers of Yeshua, Hanukkah provides insight into the very warnings he delivered on the Mount of Olives concerning the end of the age. The themes of Hanukkah, desecration and rededication, darkness and light, betrayal and courage, persecution and deliverance, reverberate throughout biblical prophecy. And it is during this very festival that Yeshua walked the temple courts, calling his nation to recognize him as the true shepherd and the light of the world. Hanukkah therefore stands as both a memorial and a prophetic signpost. It reminds us of past faithfulness and prepares us for what is to come. It calls God's people to vigilance, to covenant loyalty, and to confidence in the God who restores his sanctuary and defeats the oppressor, not once, but in every generation until the Messiah is revealed in glory. This is why we must commemorate it. Thank you for watching the Israel Illuminated channel. If you like our channel, please like and subscribe, and we will see you on the next one.